Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, Part 1. Egypt before Cleopatra. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great crossed into Egypt and ended over 2 centuries of Persian domination. The Egyptians welcomed him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Alexander visited the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where priests hailed him as the son of the god. When he died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BC, his empire fractured. One of his most trusted generals, Ptolemy son of Lagus, seized Egypt and established a dynasty that would rule for nearly 300 years. The Ptolemies transformed Egypt into a Hellenistic kingdom. They made Alexandria their capital, and it quickly became one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. The great library of Alexandria held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, attracting scholars from across the Mediterranean. The Pharaoh's lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guided ships into the city's harbors. Alexandria became a center of Greek culture, learning, and commerce, rivaling Athens and Rome in importance. But the Ptolemies were Greek rulers governing an Egyptian population. They maintained Egyptian traditions when politically useful, particularly in religion, but they spoke Greek, followed Greek customs, and considered themselves heirs to Alexander's legacy rather than descendants of the ancient pharaohs. For most of their history, they did not even learn the Egyptian language. The native Egyptian population remained culturally distinct, and tensions simmered beneath the surface of Ptolemaic rule. Egypt's wealth made it strategically vital. The Nile's annual floods produced enormous grain harvests, feeding not only Egypt but much of the Mediterranean world. Egyptian grain would later feed Rome's hungry masses. The kingdom also controlled vital trade routes connecting the Mediterranean to Africa, Arabia, and India. This prosperity made Egypt immensely powerful in the Hellenistic world. By the 1st century BC, however, the Ptolemaic kingdom had entered a period of dramatic decline. Internal family conflicts became increasingly violent. Ptolemaic rulers routinely murdered siblings, parents, and children to secure the throne. Egypt suffered through civil wars, native Egyptian revolts, and economic instability. Meanwhile, Rome grew stronger. Roman legions conquered the eastern Mediterranean, one kingdom after another. The Ptolemies survived partly through diplomacy, partly through bribery, and partly because Rome found a wealthy, nominally independent Egypt more useful than a province requiring direct administration. But everyone understood the reality. Rome held the power to decide Egypt's fate. This was the world into which Cleopatra VII would be born, a world of fatting Egyptian grandeur and rising Roman dominance. *** Sources used. *** Roller, Dwayne W. * Cleopatra. A Biography, pp. 1528. Bevan, Edwin. The House of Ptolemy, pp. 124, 323, 341. Manning, J.G. * The Last Pharaohs. Egypt under the Ptolemies, pp. 120, 153, 170. * The Cambridge Ancient History, Volume IX, pp. 102, 116. Part 2, Childhood, Family, and Rise to Power. Cleopatra VII Philopator was born in early 69 BC in Alexandria. Her father was Ptolemy XII Auletes, whose nickname meant the flute player. The identity of her mother remains uncertain. Most scholars believe she was likely Cleopatra V Tryphena, Ptolemy XII's wife and possibly his sister, following Ptolemaic tradition of sibling marriage. Some historians have suggested Cleopatra's mother might have been a concubine, but the evidence remains inconclusive. What we know with certainty is that Cleopatra was recognized as legitimate royalty and raised within the palace at Alexandria. She received an exceptional education. Unlike most of her Ptolemaic ancestors, Cleopatra learned to speak Egyptian, the language of her subjects. According to Plutarch, she spoke at least 9 languages, including Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Ethiopic, and the languages of the Parthians, Hebrews, Medes, and Troglodytes. She studied philosophy, mathematics, rhetoric, and astronomy. Ancient sources emphasize her intelligence and her persuasive manner of speaking, rather than focusing primarily on physical beauty, contrary to later popular depictions. Cleopatra grew up surrounded by violence and instability. Her father spent much of his reign desperately attempting to maintain his throne through payments to powerful Romans. In 58 BC, when Cleopatra was about 11 years old, a rebellion forced Ptolemy XII to flee Egypt. He spent 3 years in Rome, bribing senators and officials to support his restoration. During this period, Cleopatra's older sister Berenice IV seized power in Egypt. In 55 BC, the Roman governor of Syria, Aulus Gabinius, invaded Egypt with his legions and restored Ptolemy XII to the throne. The king promptly executed Berenice. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BC, his will designated the 18-year-old Cleopatra and her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy XII as joint rulers. Following Ptolemaic custom, they were married, though this was purely a political arrangement. The will also placed Egypt under Roman protection, acknowledging the republic's growing power over Egyptian affairs. Initially, Cleopatra ruled in partnership with her brother, but she quickly began excluding him from official documents and decisions. Egyptian papyri from the early years of their joint reign show that official documents ceased mentioning Ptolemy XII, listing only Cleopatra. Ancient sources make clear that she intended to rule as sole monarch, not as a figurehead for male advisors. This angered the young king's regents, particularly the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles. By 48 BC, full civil war erupted. Cleopatra raised an army, but Ptolemy XII's forces drove her from Alexandria. She retreated to the Egyptian-Syrian border, gathering troops and preparing to fight her way back to power. At this critical moment, the Roman Civil War arrived in Egypt, transforming Cleopatra's struggle and changing the course of history. Sources used Plutarch. Life of Antony, sections 27-58 Roller, Dwayne W. Cleopatra, A Biography, pp. 3152 Skiff, Stacy. Cleopatra, A Life, pp. 2347 Tildesley, Joyce. Cleopatra, Last Queen of Egypt, pp. 2958 Bevan, Edwin. The House of Ptolemy, pp. 341-360 Part 3, Julius Caesar and the Restoration of Her Throne in September 48 BC. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey the Great. The two most powerful men in Rome had been locked in civil war for control of the Republic. Pompey, defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, fled to Egypt seeking refuge. He believed the young Ptolemy XII, whose father he had once helped, would grant him sanctuary. Instead, Ptolemy XII's advisors murdered Pompey as he stepped ashore, hoping to win Caesar's favor. When Caesar arrived days later, Pothinus presented him with Pompey's severed head and signet ring. According to Plutarch, Caesar turned away in disgust and wept. Pompey had been not only Caesar's enemy, but also his former son-in-law. Caesar took up residence in the royal palace, declaring that as consul of Rome, he would arbitrate the dispute between Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra according to their father's will. What happened next became one of history's most famous episodes, though later accounts embellished the story considerably. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra needed to reach Caesar without being captured or killed by her brother's forces. She traveled by boat to the palace area, then had herself wrapped in a carpet or bedding sack and carried inside by a Sicilian merchant named Apollodorus. When the bundle was unrolled before Caesar, Cleopatra emerged. Plutarch writes that Caesar was charmed by this bold stroke, though modern historians note that this story appears decades after the events and may have been dramatized. What remains clear from contemporary evidence is that Cleopatra successfully reached Caesar and presented her case for restoration to the throne. The political logic of their alliance was straightforward. Caesar needed to resolve Egypt's civil war before he could continue pursuing his enemies. He also needed money to pay his legions, and Egypt possessed enormous wealth. Cleopatra offered cooperation, resources, and political stability. For her part, Cleopatra needed Roman military support to defeat her brother's larger forces. Whether their relationship became romantic immediately or developed over time remains uncertain, but ancient sources agree that they formed a political partnership. Ptolemy, XII's advisors, realizing Caesar supported Cleopatra, attempted to seize control. They mobilized the Egyptian army against the Romans. This triggered what became known as the Alexandrian War. Caesar's relatively small force of about 4,000 legionaries became trapped in the royal palace quarter of Alexandria. The siege lasted months. During the fighting, fires damaged part of Alexandria's famous library, though the extent of the destruction remains debated by scholars. Caesar received reinforcements from Syria and Asia Minor. At the Battle of the Nile in March 47 BC, Roman legions crushed Ptolemy XII's army. The young king drowned in the Nile River, weighed down by his golden armor. Caesar installed Cleopatra as queen, married her to her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, who was about 12 years old. Unlike her previous brother, this one posed no threat. Cleopatra ruled Egypt effectively as sole monarch, with Roman support guaranteed. In June 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Ptolemy Caesar, but he became known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. Ancient sources disagree about whether Caesar acknowledged paternity. Suetonius mentions that Caesar's friends noted the child's resemblance to him, but Caesar never formally recognized Caesarion as his son. Modern scholars note that acknowledging a foreign son would have created enormous political problems in Rome, where Caesar already faced accusations of seeking kingship. In 46 BC, Cleopatra traveled to Rome at Caesar's invitation. She stayed in his villa across the Tiber River. Her presence scandalized conservative Romans, particularly after Caesar placed a golden statue of her in the temple of Venus Genetrix. For Cleopatra, the visit served diplomatic purposes, strengthening her position with Rome's master. For Caesar, it demonstrated his power and his connections to the wealthy kingdoms of the East. The visit ended abruptly when assassins murdered Caesar on the Ides of March, 44 BC. Cleopatra immediately returned to Egypt, her position suddenly uncertain in the chaos following Caesar's death. Sources used, Plutarch. Life of Caesar, sections 48-49 Plutarch. Life of Antony, section 27 Cassius Dio. Roman History, Book 42, sections 34-44 Suetonius. The 12 Caesars, Julius Caesar, section 52 Roller, Dwayne W. Cleopatra, A Biography, pp. 5382 Skiff, Stacy, Cleopatra, A Life, pp. 4892 Holland, Tom, Rubicon, The Last Years of the Roman Republic, pp. 349-368 Part 4. Alliance with Mark Antony. Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into renewed civil war. His murderers, Brutus and Cassius, claimed they had saved the Republic from tyranny. Caesar's supporters, led by his lieutenant Mark Antony and his adopted heir Octavian, sought vengeance. In 43 BC, Antony, Octavian, and another general named Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate, legally sanctioned dictators who divided the Roman world among themselves. They proscribed their enemies, confiscating property and ordering executions. Hundreds of senators and equestrians died, including the great orator Cicero. In 42 BC, the triumvirs defeated Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Greece. Afterward, they divided responsibilities. Octavian took the west and returned to Italy. Antony took the east, where he needed to raise money to pay his legions and reorganize Rome's eastern territories. He summoned client kings and rulers to demonstrate their loyalty. Among them was Cleopatra, queen of Rome's wealthiest client kingdom. They met at Tarsus in Cilicia in 41 BC. According to Plutarch's famous description, written over a century later, Cleopatra arrived in a magnificent barge with purple sails, silver oars, and herself dressed as Venus, surrounded by attendants costumed as sea nymphs and cupids. While this account may reflect later embellishment, it captures an important truth. Cleopatra understood political theater. She needed to impress Antony with Egypt's wealth and her own capabilities. The meeting resulted in a political alliance. Antony needed Egypt's grain and gold. Cleopatra needed Roman protection and support against potential rivals. She also asked Antony to execute her sister Arsinoe, who had taken refuge in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus and represented a potential threat. Antony agreed, violating the temple's sanctuary. Modern historians emphasize that this relationship began as a practical political arrangement between two experienced rulers, not the passionate romance later depicted in literature and film. Antony spent the winter of 40–140 BC in Alexandria. During this period, Cleopatra became pregnant with twins. Antony then left Egypt to deal with military and political crises. The Parthian Empire invaded Roman territory in the east. Meanwhile, Antony's wife Fulvia and his brother raised rebellion against Octavian in Italy. The revolt failed, and Fulvia died. Antony did not return to Egypt for nearly 4 years. During his absence, Cleopatra gave birth to twins in 40 BC, a boy named Alexander Helios and a girl named Cleopatra Selene. She raised them in Alexandria while maintaining Egypt's loyalty to Antony. In 40 BC, Antony married Octavian's sister Octavia in a political arrangement designed to strengthen the alliance between the triumvirs. For several years, Antony lived primarily in Athens with Octavia, who bore him 2 daughters. Antony finally returned to the east in 37 BC to launch his long-planned invasion of Parthia, Rome's great eastern rival. He summoned Cleopatra to Syria. Their alliance resumed, now on stronger terms. Antony recognized the twins and gave Cleopatra substantial territories, portions of coastal Syria, parts of Cilicia, Cyprus, and other territories that had once belonged to the Ptolemaic Empire. In exchange, Cleopatra provided money, grain, ships, and supplies for his Parthian campaign. She also became pregnant with their 3rd child, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Born in 36 BC, the Parthian campaign proved disastrous. Antony lost perhaps 20,000 men and achieved nothing substantial. He retreated to Syria, where Cleopatra met him with supplies and money. From this point forward, Antony spent most of his time in the eastern Mediterranean, increasingly dependent on Egyptian resources and increasingly aligned with Cleopatra rather than with Octavian. In 34 BC, Antony celebrated a triumph in Alexandria for victories over Armenia, a ceremony traditionally held only in Rome. At the ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria, he distributed eastern territories to Cleopatra and their children. He proclaimed Caesarion as legitimate son of Julius Caesar and co-ruler with Cleopatra of Egypt and Cyprus. Alexander Helios received Armenia, Media, and Parthia. Cleopatra Selene received Cyrenaica and Libya. Ptolemy Philadelphus received Syria and Cilicia. Cleopatra herself was proclaimed Queen of Kings, and her children Kings of Kings. News of these donations outraged opinion in Rome. Octavian exploited Roman anger brilliantly. He portrayed Antony as bewitched by a foreign queen, squandering Roman conquests on Egyptian children, abandoning his lawful Roman wife Octavia, and planning to move the capital from Rome to Alexandria. This propaganda campaign proved devastatingly effective. Whether Antony actually planned these things remains unclear. Modern historians note that distributing territories to client rulers was standard Roman practice, and Antony's arrangements served strategic purposes. But Octavian transformed these political acts into evidence of treason and Oriental corruption. In 32 BC, Antony formally divorced Octavia. Octavian obtained Antony's will, possibly illegally, and read portions to the Senate. The will reportedly requested Antony be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra, even if he died in Rome. Octavian convinced the Senate to declare war not on Antony, a Roman citizen and fellow triumvir, but on Cleopatra, depicting the coming conflict as a war between Rome and a foreign queen who threatened Roman liberty. Sources used. Plutarch. Life of Antony, sections 2536, 5058 Cassius Dio. Roman History, Book 48, sections 2428, Book 49, sections 3241, Book 50, sections 15 Appian. The Civil Wars, Book 5, Sections 8-9. Roller, Dwayne W. * Cleopatra, A Biography, pp. 83-126. Skiff, Stacy. Cleopatra, A Life, pp. 93-192. Beard, Mary. SBQR, A History of Ancient Rome, pp. 340-362. Part 5, War with Octavian and the Fall of Egypt in 32 BC. Both sides prepared for war. Antony gathered his forces in Greece with a massive fleet and army. Cleopatra accompanied him with 60 Egyptian warships and substantial financial resources. Her presence created problems. Many of Antony's Roman supporters found it politically impossible to fight alongside a foreign queen against fellow Romans. Some of his key allies deserted to Octavian. Antony faced a dilemma. He needed Egypt's money and ships, but Cleopatra's presence undermined his support among Romans. Octavian's general Marcus Agrippa proved a brilliant naval commander. Rather than risking a direct battle, Agrippa harassed Antony's supply lines and captured key coastal positions. By late summer 31 BC, Antony's forces were trapped at Actium on the western coast of Greece. His army suffered from disease and desertion. His fleet remained bottled up in the Gulf of Ambracia by Octavian's navy. On September 2, 31 BC, the Battle of Actium began. Ancient sources provide conflicting accounts of what happened. According to Plutarch, Antony's plan involved breaking through Octavian's blockade with the strongest ships, allowing Cleopatra's squadron carrying the war treasury to escape, then following her to Egypt where they could regroup. Other ancient writers, hostile to Antony, claimed Cleopatra fled in panic and Antony abandoned his forces to follow her. Modern historians generally accept that a breakout was planned. Cleopatra's squadron, carrying Egypt's treasury, successfully sailed through the battle and headed for Egypt. Antony followed with some ships, leaving the majority of his fleet and army behind. Within days, both surrendered to Octavian. Whether this reflected a failed strategic plan or a disastrous rout remains debated, but the result was clear. Antony's military position collapsed. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Alexandria. They spent the winter attempting to prepare defenses and negotiate. Cleopatra investigated whether she might transport ships across the desert to the Red Sea and escape to the east, but local rulers burned the test ships. Antony sent his eldest son by his Roman wife Fulvia to negotiate with Octavian. Octavian executed him. They sent further embassies. According to Plutarch and Dio, Octavian offered to spare Cleopatra if she killed Antony or surrendered him. She refused. In summer 30 BC, Octavian invaded Egypt. His forces met minimal resistance. Antony's remaining supporters deserted or surrendered. Antony won a small cavalry skirmish outside Alexandria, but when he prepared to fight a decisive battle, his fleet and cavalry defected to Octavian. His infantry melted away. According to Plutarch's account, Cleopatra retreated to her tomb or mausoleum which she had built in Alexandria. A false report reached Antony that she had killed herself. Devastated, Antony stabbed himself in the stomach with his sword. As he lay dying, word came that Cleopatra still lived. Servants carried the dying Antony to her monument. Unable or unwilling to open the sealed doors, Cleopatra and her attendants hauled Antony up through a window. He died in her arms. The date was August 1, 30 BC. Octavian's forces captured Cleopatra. Ancient sources disagree about her final days. According to Plutarch, she attempted to negotiate with Octavian, hoping to secure safety for her children. She met with Octavian at least once. When she understood he intended to parade her through Rome in his triumph, displaying her defeat to Roman crowds, she resolved to die. The famous story of Cleopatra's death by cobra or asp became instantly iconic. According to Plutarch, she died on August 10 or 12, 30 BC. Two of her most loyal attendants, Eras and Charmian, died with her. Octavian's guards found them dead. A snake was rumored to have been smuggled in, hidden in a basket of figs, and Cleopatra died from its bite. Plutarch himself expressed doubt about this account, noting that some claimed she used a sharp pin coated with poison, while others said the asp was never found. Modern scholars debate Cleopatra's death. Some accept the snake story as possible. Others note that asp venom causes an agonizing death over many hours, hardly the peaceful end ancient sources describe. The symptoms described match better with poison, possibly smuggled in by her physician Olympus. What remains certain is that Cleopatra died by her own hand at age 39, preventing Octavian from displaying her as a captive in Rome. Octavian allowed her to be buried beside Antony, location unknown to this day. He executed Caesarion, eliminating the potential rival as Julius Caesar's son. He spared Cleopatra's children by Antony. They were taken to Rome and raised by Octavian's sister Octavia, Antony's former wife. Egypt became a Roman province, ruled not by the Senate but directly by Octavian himself. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended after nearly 3 centuries. 3,000 years of pharaonic Egypt came to a close. Sources used Plutarch. Life of Antony, section 6087 Cassius Dio. Roman History, Book 50, sections 1035. Book 51, sections 115 Appian. The Civil Wars, Book 5, section 11 Roller, Dwayne W. Cleopatra. A Biography, pp. 127-150 for Skiff, Stacy. Cleopatra, A Life, pp. 193-89 Tildesley, Joyce. Cleopatra, Last Queen of Egypt, pp. 175-7 Part 6. Cleopatra Beyond the Myth. Most of what the world knows about Cleopatra comes from Roman sources written by her enemies or their successors. Octavian waged a propaganda war against her, portraying her as a seductress who corrupted virtuous Roman men, a drunken Oriental despot, and a threat to Rome itself. Roman poets like Horace and Propertius reinforced these images. Later historians like Plutarch, writing more than a century after Cleopatra's death, drew on sources colored by Augustan propaganda. No writings by Cleopatra survive. No Egyptian sources from her reign provide her perspective. The historical Cleopatra emerges only partially from sources designed to condemn her. Modern scholarship emphasizes that Cleopatra was first and foremost a ruler who governed Egypt for 21 years. She maintained the Ptolemaic administrative system, which collected taxes efficiently and managed Egypt's agricultural wealth. Egyptian papyri show her government regulating grain prices, managing irrigation systems, and maintaining temples. She reduced Egypt's tax burden in difficult times and granted tax exemptions to maintain public support. While the ancient sources focus on her relationships with Caesar and Antony, she spent most of her reign governing Egypt during a period of relative internal stability. Cleopatra understood naval power. She maintained Egypt's fleet as one of the Mediterranean's strongest. She provided ships for both Caesar's and Antony's campaigns. Her naval forces protected Egypt's grain shipments and commercial trade routes. She also pursued economic interests beyond traditional Egyptian territories, according to Strabo attempting to develop Red Sea trade routes to India and East Africa. Unlike most Ptolemies, Cleopatra embraced her role as an Egyptian pharaoh, not merely as a Greek ruler of Egypt. She learned the Egyptian language, participated in Egyptian religious rituals, and presented herself in Egyptian iconography. Temple inscriptions from her reign show her following traditional pharaonic forms. She cultivated support among the Egyptian priesthood and native population, understanding that effective rule required more than Greek-speaking Alexandrian elites. She patronized learning and scholarship. Alexandria remained the Mediterranean's intellectual capital during her reign. The library and museum continued operating. Scholars dedicated mathematical and astronomical works to her. Ancient sources credit her with writing treatises on cosmetics, medicine, and weights and measures, though none survive and their authenticity remains uncertain. Cleopatra carefully managed her public image through coinage, statues, and official iconography. Her coins show her with a prominent nose and strong features, emphasizing intelligence and authority rather than conventional beauty. This contrasts sharply with Roman propaganda that focused obsessively on her supposed sexual allure. Modern analysis of contemporary portraits suggests Cleopatra deliberately presented herself as a capable monarch rather than emphasizing feminine beauty. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony served clear political purposes. Egypt needed Roman protection. Rome needed Egyptian wealth. Cleopatra leveraged Egypt's resources to secure powerful Roman allies who would protect her throne and restore lost territories. Modern historians emphasize that these relationships, whatever their personal dimensions, functioned primarily as political alliances between rulers of vast wealth and military power. The Roman portrayal of Cleopatra as primarily a sexual temptress reflected deep Roman anxieties about women wielding power and about Eastern luxury corrupting Roman virtue. Romans feared strong women. They feared foreign influence. Cleopatra embodied both fears. Octavian's propaganda depicted her as an existential threat to Roman masculinity and Roman liberty, justifying his civil war against Antony as defense of Rome against foreign conquest. This image persisted through history. Medieval writers portrayed her as a symbol of dangerous female sexuality. Renaissance and early modern literature transformed her into a tragic romantic heroine. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra cemented the image of doomed lovers destroyed by passion. 20th century films, particularly the 1963 epic starring Elizabeth Taylor, emphasized romance and spectacle over political reality. Only in recent decades have historians reconstructed Cleopatra as a Hellenistic monarch navigating the dangerous transition from the age of independent kingdoms to Roman imperial dominance. She ruled longer than most Ptolemies. She maintained Egypt's independence for 2 decades while other Eastern kingdoms fell to Rome. She proved herself a skilled diplomat, administrator, and strategist. Her ultimate defeat came not from personal failings, but from confronting the overwhelming military and political power of Rome at its moment of transformation from republic to empire. *** Sources used. *** Roller, Dwayne W. * Cleopatra. A Biography, pp. 114, 155, 178. Skiff, Stacy. Cleopatra. A Life, pp. 122, 293. 06. Tildesley, Joyce. Cleopatra. Last Queen of Egypt, pp. 128, 208-30. For Walker, Susan, and Peter Higgs, eds. Cleopatra of Egypt. From History to Myth, pp. 356. The Oxford Classical Dictionary *, 4th ed. Cleopatra VII, pp. 328-329. Part 7. Legacy and Historical Importance. Egypt's 3,000-year history as an independent civilization ended with Cleopatra's death. Octavian, soon to become Augustus Caesar, transformed Egypt into his personal province. No senator could visit without his permission. Egypt's enormous grain production now fed Rome's population directly. The administrative systems the Ptolemies developed served Roman imperial purposes. Temples continued functioning, but under Roman oversight. The pharaonic tradition, maintained in modified form by the Ptolemies, ceased. Egypt would not regain independence for over 2,000 years. Octavian paraded Cleopatra's children through Rome in his triumph. An effigy of the dead queen, with a snake attached to her arm, featured in the procession. Roman crowds witnessed the symbolic defeat of the Eastern queen who had threatened their city. Afterward, Octavian showed mercy to Cleopatra's surviving children by Antony. Cleopatra Selene grew up in Octavia's household. She eventually married Juba II, the scholarly king of Mauritania, and ruled as queen. Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus disappear from historical record, likely dying young from natural causes. Only Caesarion faced execution. As a potential rival claiming descent from Julius Caesar, he could not be permitted to live. A saying attributed to the Alexandrian philosopher Arius supposedly convinced Augustus, "Too many Caesars is not good." Cleopatra's impact on Roman politics proved profound. The civil wars that destroyed the Roman Republic reached their climax in the conflict between Octavian and Antony, with Cleopatra positioned as the symbolic enemy justifying Roman violence against Romans. Octavian's victory eliminated the last rival for supreme power. In 27 BC, he accepted the title Augustus and established the Roman Empire. His propaganda had portrayed Cleopatra as the antithesis of Roman values: female rather than male, Eastern rather than Western, monarch rather than citizen, excessive rather than moderate. Defeating her symbolically justified his own monarchy, presented as necessary to save Rome from foreign domination. For Romans, Cleopatra became a cautionary symbol. She represented the dangers of Eastern luxury, female ambition, and sexual corruption. Poets warned against women who sought power over men. Moralists cited her as proof that foreign influences threatened Roman virtue. This image, created by Augustan propaganda, shaped how later generations understood her. Yet Cleopatra also fascinated subsequent cultures precisely because she wielded power in a man's world. Medieval writers included her among famous women, usually as a warning but sometimes with grudging admiration. Renaissance humanists debated whether she represented vice or virtue. Enlightenment writers saw her as a rational ruler destroyed by circumstances. Romantic poets transformed her into a passionate heroine choosing death over dishonor. Modern historical scholarship, beginning in the 20th century, has worked to strip away layers of legend and propaganda to reach the historical figure beneath. Historians emphasize several key points about Cleopatra's genuine historical importance. First, she was the last significant Hellenistic monarch. The kingdoms established by Alexander's successors had dominated the eastern Mediterranean for 3 centuries. One by one, Rome conquered or absorbed them. Cleopatra's Egypt was the last to fall. Her death marked the end of the Hellenistic age and the beginning of Rome's unchallenged dominance over the Mediterranean world. Second, she successfully ruled Egypt for over 2 decades during a period of immense political turbulence. She navigated Roman civil wars, maintained Egypt's internal stability, and preserved her kingdom's nominal independence far longer than seemed possible. While she ultimately failed, her political skill prolonged Egypt's autonomy for a generation. Third, she demonstrated sophisticated understanding of power politics. She recognized that Egypt's survival depended on alliance with Rome's masters. She leveraged Egypt's wealth to secure protection from Caesar, then Antony. When circumstances changed, she adapted her strategy. She understood naval power, economic leverage, and symbolic politics. Her meeting with Antony at Tarsus, whatever its historical details, showed brilliant political theater designed to impress a potential ally. Fourth, she challenged Roman prejudices about women and foreign rulers. Romans found a powerful, intelligent, politically active woman profoundly threatening. Their propaganda reveals as much about Roman fears as about Cleopatra herself. She became a screen onto which Romans projected anxieties about women, foreigners, and the corruption of traditional values. Finally, Cleopatra represents the complexity of identity and power in the ancient Mediterranean. She was ethnically Greek but ruled Egypt and presented herself as an Egyptian pharaoh. She spoke multiple languages and navigated multiple cultures. She formed relationships with Roman generals while preserving Egyptian interests. She embodied the cosmopolitan, multicultural nature of the late Hellenistic world, soon to be replaced by Roman uniformity. Modern scholars emphasize that Cleopatra should be remembered not primarily as a seductress or tragic romantic figure, but as a capable monarch who ruled Egypt during its final independent generation. She lost, ultimately, not because of personal failings, but because she confronted the rising Roman Empire at the moment it transformed from republic to autocracy. Egypt's wealth and strategic importance made conflict inevitable. Cleopatra's intelligence, political skill, and diplomatic acumen delayed the inevitable for 2 decades. That she failed says less about her capabilities than about the overwhelming force of historical circumstances she could not control. She remains one of history's most famous women because her story touches universal themes: power and its limits, intelligence confronting superior force, dignity in defeat, the collision of cultures, and the problematic nature of historical memory when written by victors. Separating the historical Cleopatra from 2,000 years of myth remains difficult but essential. What emerges is a ruler worthy of serious historical attention, not merely as a romantic figure, but as a significant political actor during one of history's great transitions. Sources used. Cassius Dio. Roman History, Book 51, Sections 1517 Plutarch. Life of Antony, Sections 87 Roller, Dwayne W. Cleopatra, A Biography, pp. 155-178 Skiff, Stacy. Cleopatra, A Life, pp. 293-11 Tildesley Joyce, Cleopatra, Last Queen of Egypt, pp. 208-30 for Beard Mary, SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, pp. 362-367 Walker, Susan and Peter Higgs, eds. Cleopatra of Egypt, From History to Myth, pp. 296-319 The Cambridge Ancient History, Volume X *, pp. 5382.